Hey, welcome back to Bible Bites, where we chew on the hard parts of Scripture together. This last week, we looked at a passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And today, we're going to zoom in on the part where Paul starts mixing his metaphors. In verse 26, he says, "So I run with purpose in every step. I'm not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should." So Paul has been talking about running a race in this passage. And then he starts talking about shadow boxing, which if you're a fighter, you know that means you're sparring with an imaginary opponent. Paul's saying, I'm not doing that because my opponent is not imaginary. In fact, in another part of Scripture, Paul reminds us that we are in a very real struggle. But it's not a struggle against flesh and blood. It is a struggle against the spiritual powers and forces of this dark world. Well, who is Paul referring to? He is talking about the devil. He's talking about this spiritual being who opposes God and his people. He comes after us by targeting our identity with his lies and deception. What can we do about that? Well, Paul actually mentioned it in verse 27 when he said, I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Paul is telling us that spiritual disciplines are spiritual warfare. So what habits and practices of Jesus do you need to make your habits and practices so you can be ready for the attacks of the enemy?